I come from a family that they believe they are descendants of the old gods. That's the best way to say it. That they believe that they are carriers of a seed line that gives them the divine right to rule. And that is what gives them justification spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, scientifically to dominate the lesser species known as humans.
Do you think that's in your blood?
I believe it was, yeah. I believe it is. It was very hard for me to get to a place where I could believe that I could be redeemed.
Nathan Reynolds has an interesting bloodline, to say the least. Yet, he was redeemed by Yeshua. This has to be one of the most fascinating testimonies. And he was tortured and abused in satanic rituals. He was forced to participate in sacrifices. However, he ended up finding Christ. I'm going to come back and talk about how this truly applies to 2025 and the times in which we are witnessing now. Before you assume this is clickbait or conspiracy, you might just want to stick around until the end because his testimony is more biblical than you realize.
No, I come from a family that they believe they are descendants of the old gods. That's the best way to say it. That they believe that they are carriers of a seed line that gives them the divine right to rule. And that is what gives them justification spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, scientifically to dominate the lesser species known as humans. Humans literally means a lesser species of man. And they do not believe they are a human in the same way. They believe they are something other than. And that's descendants of this hierarchical ruling species that is from the celestial realm that descended in the days of Jared and came down and procreated with the daughters of men, and that they still trace their seed line back to Gilgamesh till Nimrod. And so this is what the dynastic families believe they have, is a superiority in their genetics on one side and the ability to commune with the divine. And so their children are progenitors of these, some might call them abreactions, mutations, these skills, psychic abilities, that kind of stuff, all variants of it. And so they raise up their children in this path with which involves a tremendous amount of shattering of the soul and the identity so that there's compartmentalization within, and it allows them the ability to train their child up in a way that makes them conducive towards the family. I call them the family. That's what I called them. You know, it's a better word for mafia than anything else. But no, we didn't call ourselves, like my family wouldn't ever call themselves Illuminists.
Yeah.
Right? They're Luciferian. That's for certain. They worship Hallel and Shahar, as he's really known, but different reasons than what people are ascribed to, you know.
Interesting. All right. So I want you to start from the beginning of what your childhood was like and just walk us through this. But before you do, you just said something that I got to ask you before I forget. Are what they believe, do you believe is true in the sense of them being able to trace back their lineage to the fallen?
Some of them, yes. I believe they absolutely can.
Do you think that's in your blood?
I believe it was, yeah. I believe it is.
Yeah?
I believe there's no way to physiologically necessarily... my blood's been augmented a lot over the years. I volunteered for a lot of stuff and said yes to everything that they could ever give me that would make me better than what I was. I was on a desperate quest for relief. And so I volunteered for all kinds of stuff, and I volunteered for stuff that was transhuman in its nature.
Really?
And it augmented me quickly, you know? And that was brutal, because then there's this, I lived a lot longer than I expected. Let me just put it that way. I did not think I would ever see 18. Never even comprehended the idea that I would ever know a family that wasn't this other thing, where the powers of control and access were given through the abuse of children. That's what I knew as normal. And I knew that people were corrupt and monsters and were willing to devour each other to rise to the top. I understood what wolves were when they ran the world. And so it was very hard for me to get to a place where I could believe that I could be redeemed, because I had witnessed enough of things in the families that make it seem like I am irredeemable forever. And it took me, there was one book that made a massive difference in that, which was called The Gospel to Every Creature. And I believe it's written by John Darnell. It is very hard to find. I have a copy, but it's been scrubbed. And it's the good news to Nephilim, vampires, and transhumans, you know? And it helped me to see that maybe I wasn't anathema, that maybe just because I have this seed line in me, that maybe just because I'm a progenitor of the offspring of the fallen, that it doesn't mean that I'm not able to be redeemed, because no matter what, by blood or by belief, I believe that we have a Messiah that overcame and we can overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the words of our testimony, and not living our lives when faced with death. And it was that powerful encounter with the Almighty, with the true judge of all the earth, who I can make an appeal to, who can give me a new bloodline, and that's what he offers to everyone. Wow. And so I do believe that's available to those that come from these families.
That's wild. I didn't. Last year in the Christmas season, I took the last 2 weeks of the year off, and I had other people host the show. And my friend Joel did an episode that he called "Good Nephilim," and he kind of goes into this idea of Nephilim being able to be redeemed.
Yeah,
and it's a concept that I feel like has not been tapped into a whole lot. And he did on my show for I think the first time. And since then he's kind of uncovered more information to back up his claims. But having, a real life Nephilim here, not just kidding. But it's just, it kind of goes into that concept, Yeah. And so that's why I asked you, because I was like, hold on, like that's pretty wild. Like, to be like, have I ever encountered somebody who comes from that bloodline? Maybe. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people, but how many times do you come across somebody that does come from that bloodline and acknowledges it, knows it? That's another thing. And so that's why I wanted to ask you that. So you kind of hit on the childhood stuff right there in that kind of description. Was it something that came from complete childhood, where it's like from your earliest memories is just been kind of manipulated and jacked up? And what was that like for you growing up?
Well, my family set up a base of operations. They're from the East Coast, the Reynolds family on one side. My mother's family, just for clarity, I've never exposed a lot of the side of things that were going on with, let me say it another way. The Reynolds family on my father's side, they're all from the East Coast out here, and they're a dynastic family. Like my great-grandfather, a man named Don Potter Reynolds, was the architect, the head of engineering for the president, as the president of the American Society of Civil Engineering back in the 80s. And he's the one who put the new torch in the Luciferian hand of the Statue of Liberty of Columbia. And so he's a master Mason Luciferian in that way. And he was so much of the shot caller for the family at that time, especially when I came into being. And but my dad left that thing and moved out to the Southwest and started a different empire. And so a lot of how it works in the families is you got two main approaches. If you've got unlimited access to wealth, power, like really, I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about power, like unlimited raw power, where a phone call, the phone book, is far more powerful than the bank account, because it's who can open doors to power anywhere else in the entire world. And that's where everything was. So you can leave with nothing, but then you can go build. And if you need the phone book, there's a price to be paid. And the price to be paid is generally one of your children. This is like the reality. It seems bizarre to some, but a child is generally a chosen child out of the family, is given over as an offering to the family. And they're the ones who's going to go through this left-hand path. They're going to experience the desecration of their soul, their identity, and they're going to become an agent for the family that is owned completely. And there's like a legal trustee that is given over to it. There's a board of directors that sits over it. Like, these are real legal confines for how the wealth is distributed out there. And so in order to build your empire, you got to be able to go prove yourself. And that's what he ended up doing out in the Southwest. And he moved to Arizona, an area called Flagstaff, Arizona. And where I was born, that is a place that's a high place, Mount Humphreys. It's a volcanic peaks that sit there. And the top of it is where the Hopi Indian and a lot of people had gathered forever to commune with the fallen. They believed that the sons of the sky would come down every season at the winter solstice, and they would abide from the winter solstice to the summer solstice there. And so this was a place where they would give their daughters over to them. This is Hopi mythology, like 101, and they would make these Kachina dolls, which were an effigy of the what I would say is a watcher angel that would come, and the daughter would be given to him, and she would place that over her bed throughout her life, and that's her familiar spirit, right? That's where I was born into. And the people that still practice that old religion, that's the way I refer to it, they still do this. And they still take their children up there to give them over to them on these high days. And so I was born into that, and I was born through that seed line and into that ritual magic world. And but my mother's side are extreme Catholics and Jesuits through and through. And so her father ran a different operation in Southern California, which was much more based on the child exploitation side of the equation. And he operated out of Lake Havasu City, Arizona. Lake Havasu, for those of you that are unfamiliar, sits in the absolute desert border of Arizona and California, and it has the Colorado River that's been dammed up, and they created an artificial lake there. And it was a secret military base back in World War II. It was called Site 6. And it was a stopover point crossing the desert for soldiers going there. And they would made it into a rest and recuperation area. And so it was a party city from its foundation. It had a lot of underground structures that were built into it as a refueling point. And in the 1960s, a guy named Robert P. McCulloch bought it. And he bought it, and he also purchased the London Bridge that crossed the River Thames. And he had it shipped over here stone by stone. And while they were doing that, they excavated 80 bodies that were entombed inside it in a practice that's called Enshrinement, where you would sacrifice a person and bury them alive in the walls of the foundation. And so there's all these chambers in this facility of the London Bridge where they would do torture and all kinds of ritual stuff. But this is why the sing-song nursery rhyme, the London Bridge is falling down, falling down. That's a nursery rhyme to talk about how you have to give your children over to the government so you can hold up the London Bridge. And they would literally take their children. This is in the history book of the museum at Lake Havasu City. You can see these bodies of these children that were sacrificed inside the walls of that space. So he bought that as a charged object. He bought that as a portal mechanism. And they built in Lake Havasu City with another designer from the Disneyland. And they literally built a pleasure island. That's what it was facilitated for. And they designed it so that it would be a retirement community that would facilitate the exploitation of children. And that's exclusively what that city was founded and built for. And so the original founders of that operated out of the Knights of Columbus predominantly as a wing of the Jesuits. And that's the business down there. It's an industry to cover up child abuse. You got a bunch of old men running around with little boys, and everybody thinks they're grandchildren and nephews and nieces and all that rest. And so all along that area down there is where I would be taken from my earliest days and shattered, abused, traumatized, systemically so. But it's for behavioral modification purposes. That's the end goal of the abuse, is to shatter your willingness to resist and to break your will. And once they own you and you have been woefully convinced you can never get out, you give in. And that's what happened. I became the person who I was, died, and the person they wanted me to become was what was born out of that disgusting Phoenix ashes,
Wow. How long does that process take? I mean, was this like just a few years of your childhood, or was this like a constant thing throughout your teen years, or what?
I mean, every individual is different. How long does it take to break a dog? That was the approach they took with me. You find out everybody has different talents and giftings and capabilities and capacities. And so in the beginning phase, a lot of it is you're just raising them up a little more normally. There's a lot of early trauma stuff that's hard to articulate and can be messy with memory. But as I got older, like 5 and 6 years old, man, it became very apparent that I had a desire for justice. That was like the sole deepest desire that I had, was I wanted people to know freedom, because I had been so deprived of it from day one. And there's this practice of switching mothers. You'll have a cult mother, and then they have your regular mom, and then they create this trauma bonding so that you'll bond with anybody that they want you to do. And this happens by taking you away from your mom and your dad constantly and giving you new mom and dad, new uncles, new aunts.
Now, before I continue playing this podcast for you, I just want to say, does this sound familiar to the American culture? How no one even has a mom and dad anymore? How the spirit of Jezebel has run loose? How we've almost incentivized single motherhood. We've almost rewarded single motherhood in our welfare system since 1950. Now, before I play for you the most interesting part of this podcast, he goes on to talk about the deep underground bases and the technology and the realms in which they were accessing. The skinwalkers, he was taught and trained to stalk and learn of all of these types and shadows.
The one that comes to mind is episode 335. Kyle was the groundbreaking episode for me going into the Dogman topic. I've had it before, but this was just like, whoa. Long story short, he's 15 years old, hunting with his grandfather in Kentucky, Daniel Boone National Forest, the upper side of it. And it's middle of the night. His grandfather's in the truck because he was older, so they had radios. The dogs get on a scent. You hear him howling. He comes up on the scene, and he can hear his dogs fighting with coyotes. The coyotes go off. He only had 2 dogs out there. And in that fight, he heard his younger dog run off as well. So now the older dog, who's a really good hunter, really strong dog, is by himself, fights off these coyotes. They come back in, and it sounded like they came back in a pack almost, and started whooping up on his hound dog. I think it's a hound dog. Don't hold me to that, but hunting dog. And then he hears his other dog come back in. And when his other dog came back in, the fight changes. Coyotes are gone. He comes onto the scene. His older dog goes back to treeing the raccoon in the tree. He comes over, pats him on the head, and he hears his younger dog behind the tree chowing down on a coyote. He goes around the tree, and it's not the younger dog. The younger dog never came back. This was a very large dog on all four. He said it was so big that it was holding a coyote by the rib cage in its mouth. And he said that when he came up on it, it looked at him and it stood up on its hind legs, took chase. That it unfolds a whole scene where basically his hunting dog saved his life. His hunting dog did survive, but barely. And he thought his dog had died at some point. That story that he shared on the show, is there any way outside of what you shared that it could be something else other than somebody that transformed from human to upright walking dog that maybe was one of those people who weren't able to handle that and could never change back? Is that in your mind what that would be? Or do you think that there are actual creatures out there that maybe come from other realms, or maybe just like some people? I don't personally subscribe to the idea that Bigfoot's just this hairy primate that we can't catch.
Yeah.
I think there's more woo-woo stuff to it. Do you think it's along those lines? What are your thoughts on that side of stuff?
That's a great question. Man, that's brutal. Because I think on one side of it, I think we really do have an entire subspecies of creatures that do exist mostly inside the earth, and they are not readily surface dwelling anymore. And I do believe, like in Lake Havasu City, Arizona, man, inside the London Bridge is a massive room, like a throne room, where they engage in this magic. But this Brotherhood of the Serpent, they call upon the Kash, the dragon. And
would that be in normal terms Satan?
Yeah, most people know him as Satan, right? Yeah. But like there is a great red dragon. Like it's a physical, that's what he looks like in reality. He was cursed, and man, he made him a monster. Yahweh made him a monster. And they would commune with these things. There's 13 grandfathers take 13 of their grandsons, and they bring them into these rooms and do these things on these specific times and rituals for all kinds of stuff. But the dragons tell them the future. This is like always what they've been able to do, is like Satan leads Yeshua up onto a great high place and says, I shows him all the nations of the earth and all their kingdoms and their reigns in a moment of time. He shows them the future. That's what they do. They can show you what's to come. This is why we get hunted by them. He knows if we're going to be part of his adversaries. He knows if we're going to be on his enemy list. And that's why he targets us at our youth. That's what so happens. So many people, they're like, why has my life been a nightmare from the beginning? It's because you have a purpose and a destiny that adversary absolutely categorically does not want to come to pass. It's a real life Terminator scenario. And so he sends his assets in to destroy people, to ruin their life. And those meeting places happen when they sit down in these rooms and they try to call up these creatures. It's from inside the earth. It wasn't like ethereal mist. They were physical things that would come out of these tunnels, and they would come into the room and they would consume the offerings that were given there. And then the words of the Nachash would come forth, and they would prophesy to these guys. Like they would prophesy out of the mouth of the serpent what each one of their life callings, their shots. He's the shot caller, man. It's like a pimp from prison. He's calling the shots, and you had a bunch of fallen watchers that were in prison in Tartarus for a reason. Yeah, but they got ways of getting messages out, just like the cronies in jail today, and that's what a lot of people are dealing with. They think they're dealing with the top dog, and they're like, I'm finally into the big game. And it's like you're dealing with, a private in the hierarchy, but he can masquerade like a general. And so some people are really dealing with death himself, and some of them are dealing with one of his princes. And this is what my family's covenant was with the dragon. They didn't mess around, man. They went all the way to the chain of command. They uncovered a bunch of my great-grandfather's grandfather was an archaeologist who dug into the Indian mounds out in the Ohio River Valley. And they started finding a priest class that was these serpent worshipers. And that's what they started calling upon. And they started trying to wake up and rise up Huachiblos, which is these deities, these dragon fire deities that demand.
This is in Ohio?
Where these mounds were found. It's the Ohio River Valley. Yeah.
Are we talking about serpent mounds?
Yeah. Well, this wasn't specifically, not that I'm aware of that it was specifically a serpent mound, but it was a mound that was in an area that was now being farmed.
Okay.
And so whether or not it was specifically a serpent mound, it was not identified as that. But they ended up finding a lot of these ancient tomes. They found the writings of this priest class, and they started using their magic to call back up these fallen ones. And they were the part of the trade is the priest class has all this secret knowledge that they then use to rule the kings with. And that's what they wanted. So that's how the Reynolds family, this is also documented in a book called The Gilded Leaf by Patrick Reynolds, who was a bloodline descendant specifically and in the actual inheritance of the Winston cigarette company, the tobacco empire that ended up buying Nabisco Foods, that ended up running the world.
What relation is it to you? Like an uncle?
I don't know that I am a bloodline relative of that guy.
Oh, okay.
Patrick Reynolds specifically. My Reynolds family is the one that does the black gold stuff, all the secret, disgusting, dirty money. They're the white launderers of the money, right? But you got to have your seedy, corrupt group. And that's what my family did. They did all the dirty stuff.
Wow.
And so but in his book, in his firsthand account, they talk about the Joshua coin and them using a coin that was from Judas that he betrayed Yeshua with, and the 30 pieces of silver that was the blood guilt money. They would touch that silver coin to anything they wanted, and it would grow an empire. The cost was always massive bloodshed and a massive demand of life. And that's always what the serpent required. He wanted life. And so like on one side of the equation, that's what they used to build the Reynolds empire. That's what they used to go down Alcoa and all the aluminum industry and all of the stuff they spray on us and the stuff they poison us with and inject us with and all the variables of complexities of targeting that they've done against us. That all comes from that covenant that those two brothers sat down, did, and entered into a blood covenant with the dragon, man. And this is what the fruit of it was. Well, my family entered into that on a different route through this priest class thing. And that's what they would practice down there. And that's the same old religion that people have been using a long time. So on one side of it, I've seen physical beings that are definitely not like our animals up here come out of these spaces from inside the earth. I've seen in deep underground military bases, dogmen, like you would kind of describe them, some more humanized. And I think a lot of those were experimentation and genetic splicing. I think a lot of that was gene editing stuff that I've seen. But I do believe that some of these things are holdovers from the old days. They're the last of their kinds, and they've been breeding them, right? And I believe that that's the stuff that's prophesied that's going to come back out and cause the hearts of men to stop for fear of looking after these things that are coming up on the earth. That's why everywhere I went throughout my youth, I could go to these tunnels and these caves and call out, and I could hear them, and they would call back, and it's like it's a seductive power that draws you back into it.
You could call out to them? Like, was it like a language or a sound or what?
Oh, yeah, man. You can learn to call to them. You can go out here in these hills out here and do it. You can still do it tonight on these full moons and stuff. You can start calling out, and you'll think you'll hear coyotes at first, and then all of a sudden it's a totally different, it's a different sound that starts to resonate. And then it's a different one that calls off from over here, right? You got to understand some of these guys that you think are just neighbors and stuff or just people, like this is what they keep in their barn,
Are they
This is the stuff they keep. Yeah. Absolutely.
I go out hunting for these things.
I understand completely, man. That being said, I got hooked back into it with Timothy Alberino and Steve Quill and a lot of these guys when I was married, and my wife didn't know anything about this whole stinking world of who I was and everything else.
How'd you meet your wife if she didn't know who you were? You suckered her. You suckered her.
That's a way to put it, man.
She's still with you, so she loves you.
Bro, she's all in, man. She's amazing. Cool. She is my shield bearer, man. She's amazing. She has fought. We have waged a war together beyond your wildest imagination. She has seen the full force of the occult come after us, and people slaughtering sacrifices to try to desecrate us, and people try to hunt us and murder us in front of her face. She's seen it in front of my children's face. They've sent special kill teams after us in front of my children's face, man. And I have seen the living power, man. Recent.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, man.
That being said, man, I do believe that there is a hierarchy, and you can call upon the Most High, man, and He has delivered us. And I've never had to fire a shot at any of these guys. I haven't had to take out their drones. I have seen supernatural intervention. I've seen their weapons jam in front of my face, like chapter in the book called Murder on Their Minds, where I talk all about it, man. I've seen Him provide supernatural miracles, because you got to understand, we're dealing with the fallen. We are not dealing with the Most High, and He owns a much more powerful arsenal. And let me tell you, at His word, all these nations, kingdoms, and thrones will bow. And it's an absolute reality. It's an inevitability. And so that's why I serve Him, man, because I've seen what the power of covenant is. And I had a covenant with the law of sin and death before in my life, but now I have a covenant with the Most High of peace and life. And He's given me a new purpose. He's given me a family. He's given me a mission. He's given me the opportunity to do the things I dreamed of when I was that little.
Now, before I play for you the most fascinating piece of his testimony that you've got to see, I need to address some things here on this video. Notice, as he was describing the things he experienced, he said, this is what the serpent always required, was life. It was blood. And he always targeted children. Why do you think our nation has been so possessed by a spirit that rejoices about more than 65 million kids being eliminated in the womb? Why do you think literally hundreds of millions of people have voted for politicians that celebrate abortion as if it's somehow empowering? It's the same demonic practice as when women in the Old Testament would sacrifice their children to the demonic god of Molech, where they would be promised economic prosperity. They would be promised everything they could ask or dream or imagine as long as they gave their children over. And if you don't think that it's a baby in the womb, if you don't think that's a human being, and you just call it a clump of cells, then what are you? See, when you turn this logic upside down, it's clear that human life begins at conception. A baby isn't more a baby a week after it's born. As someone who just saw my baby born myself this past month, my baby boy wasn't anything less of a human a week before he was born, or 2 weeks before, or a month before, or 2 months before that. He has always been there since conception. See, we're starting to understand things now. Satan is the god of this world. And I love this podcast because the truth of the matter is that you don't have to fear when you hear about all these things, when you see these bloodlines, when you see the Nephilim. And if you think they just disappeared after the flood, you need to open up your Bible again, because the Bible says clearly in Genesis chapter 6 that these fallen angels intermingled with the daughters of men. And it says in those days they multiplied, and after the flood. And we also know that giants such as Goliath, that was obviously after the flood. Why is it now in 2025, it's not an accident that we are documenting comets in the sky like 3-Eye Atlas, which aren't a comet at all? And now even atheists are accepting that the supernatural realm not only exists, but that it is clear that we live in a spiritual world that they can no longer explain. This is the year of the supernatural. This is the year of everyone understanding we live in a spiritual realm, but we don't have to be afraid of darkness. We don't have to even hunt these things down or call out to them on the mountains. We don't have to just seek these things. It's time to seek the word of God. It's time to take him at his word, and it's time to walk in the authority of Christ. And I love his testimony because he said, you know what? All of these authorities, all of these kingdoms, all of these powers, sure, they are powerful, but they are not the Most High. They are not the Almighty. They are not the King Supreme. The Alpha and Omega, beginning and the end. His name is Jesus. I invite you today to submit to him. As real as this spiritual realm is, and as real as all these demonic spirits are, so much greater is the one that can live inside of you. The Bible says in Revelations, they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. And they loved not their lives unto the death. You don't have to die to these spirits. Instead, you can die to yourself so you can live for Christ. You can deny yourself, put your own self at the altar of Jesus. That is the place of authority. That is the place of victory. And one of my favorite scriptures is found in Ephesians chapter 1. If you really want to start to understand your authority, if you are in Christ, if you have not only confessed him with your mouth, but believed him in your heart, the Bible says that just as Christ was raised from the dead and seated in the place of honor at God's right hand in the heavenly realms, and Christ is far above any ruler, authority, power, leader, or anything else, not only in this world, but also in the world to come. God has put all things under the authority of Christ, and get this, made him head over all things for the benefit of the church. That is you and that is me. For the benefit of the church. The church is his body. It's made full and complete by Christ, who fills all things everywhere with himself. Hallelujah. We are living in the end times. We are living in the shifting of frequencies. My videos are more accurate than you realize. Ask me how I know. I've heard some intel about underground bases. Now check this part of his testimony out because it's pretty cool.
And that's when it was on, man. And I was like, my wife was pregnant. She doesn't know any of this about me, but my family's going to want to take that baby out of her womb when she gives birth to it and imprint upon it. Like it's disgusting what happens right away at the birth. And I was like, they're going to drug her and they're going to take her child. She's not going to have any clue how they do this. I was like, we got to fight. We got to resist. I'm going to go all in for the kingdom of righteousness. And I'm going to absolutely do everything I can to sever ties with my family. And so I went to this conference called Hear the Watchman conference down in Dallas, Texas. It was crazy. So now we're down at this conference in Texas, and she still doesn't know anything. She's 6 months pregnant. Like, game is coming on time, right? Like, we got to figure this thing out. And I fall on my face at the end of his preaching. He calls like people, if they want prayer, come to the front. Man, I run up there and I fall on my face and I weep like I've never wept in my life. Just desperate for that evil, like that latent seed out. I want it out so bad. I want it out so bad. I want to be a man of free will. I want to know what others took for granted from their youth, which is to make a decision without somebody else's manipulations in your life. Like, I just wanted freedom, and I wanted my child to never have to know the world that I was born into. I wanted her so badly to get to choose for herself what her future would become. And I was so inadequately equipped to do that for her. I had nothing, but I had a willingness to fall on my face and cry out to the one who had everything. And I believed on him, and I called on him, and just was wrenching my heart out on that floor, man. And this guy, Tom Dunn, he laid down on the floor next to me, man, and was like, what's going on? You're clearly upset, dude. And I'm just sobbing hysterically and asking for deliverance from addictions and sexual addictions and drug addictions, substance abuse issues and stuff. I've coped with that my whole life. I was so perverted. I didn't understand normalcy with any of these things. And he just prayed for me. It wasn't like some wow thing, but he just prayed for me honestly and sincerely and asked Jesus to heal me, man, and deliver me. And when he did that, man, it was like this giant black tree just got ripped out of my brain. That's the cover of my book, man, was like the Father. He took this hand, and he took that pierced hand, and he gave me a transplant. He took me out of that family of death, and he gave me a branch of life to live again with, and that's where it started. Somebody else at the same conference, random person walked up to me, handed me this folder, and disappeared, like straight up disappeared in a line I was in. And I was like, what? And she's like, you need to read this. And it was all these prayers for breaking the curses from generational sins of Freemasonry. And I was like, what?